Pixinsight is a daunting program with a lot to learn. So much to learn that every year, everybody's process ends up a little bit different in some way. In this video, I am going to show you my current workflow using a one-shot color camera, although this works for a DSLR as well, and I'm going to provide a few tips along the way. And at the end, I'm going to show you the final touches that I usually add in Photoshop. Now, if you want to follow along, I have my image of the Soul Nebula linked down in the description below, so you can practice all you want with it. Just keep in mind, if you do post it anywhere, please do credit it back to me. And the last thing here that I do want to let you guys know about is that I am still fairly new to Pixinsight as well. I've only been using it for about 6 months, but I did want to show you at least what my current workflow is at this time. And before we get started, I did stack the image using Deep Sky Stacker. I did not stack it in Pixinsight, so we're not going over that in this video. But let's go ahead and get the image opened up. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is take a look at the image and see what exactly it looks like. And the first thing we can do is hit this little nuclear icon, the STF auto stretch, and we can see that the Soul Nebula is there and it's a little bit green. But if we zoom in and go up to the top here, you can see along the edge there's a little bit of stacking artifacts, and we're going to go ahead and crop that out. But before we do that, one thing that kind of drives me nuts about Pixinsight is the scroll wheel being backwards to every other program out there. So if you want to know how to change that, go to Edit, Global Preferences, Miscellaneous Image Window Settings, and then just change the wheel direction to forward. Now, when you scroll in and out, you scroll up to zoom in and out to zoom out, just like every other program out there. But back at it for cropping, we go to Process, Geometry, Dynamic Crop. And then for here, what we really want to do is just crop out the stacking artifacts. So I'm just going to draw a little box and just try to keep as much of the picture here, but get rid of the edges to make sure the stacking artifacts aren't included. And then go ahead and hit enter. And from there we can just close dynamic crop out. So next up is color balancing, and this is gonna get rid of that green tint that we see. Now for nebula images, I found that actually splitting all the channels out into their own channel works better for color balancing, but for galaxies and star clusters, just using the color calibration tool on its own works out just fine. So when it comes to the galaxy and star cluster workflow, I am working on another video where I just go over the highlights of my galaxy workflow, but for now we'll go through the nebula one. So to split the channels, you go to Process, Channel Management, Channel Extraction. And then from there, all you have to do is just drag the triangle down and just give it the time it needs. Alright, and we have our 3 channels. We can go ahead and just minimize the first image, and we'll put it down here. I do like to practice the non-destructive workflow like what you do in Photoshop, so anytime that there is a chance to overwrite or replace, I'd never do that. I'll always make a new image. From here, what we're going to do is get rid of the background gradient. So what we're going to do is actually stretch all 3 of these just so we can see what they look like. And blue is a little bit weak, green's kind of strong, but the one that has the most contrast is the red. So we're going to use the red. We'll minimize the green and the blue for now because we don't need them, but we are going to come back to them. And then we're going to go to Process, Background Modelization, Dynamic Background Extraction. And we're going to pull the background out on each channel individually, and this kind of helps just clean things up a little bit nicer. Okay, in Dynamic Background Extraction, the first thing you need to do is actually click on the image to initialize it. And then from there, we can kind of ignore the model parameters, and we actually want to go down to Sample Generation. And I'm going to go ahead and hit reset real quick just to make sure that it is good to go. Now, for default sample radius, I generally set this to about 10. Works out just fine. However, for the samples per row, this book here mentions that less is more when it comes to dynamic background extraction. And they actually point out that a lot of people put in hundreds of points around the image, and it actually kind of hurts the algorithm that helps figure out what is background, what's light pollution, and what is the actual object. So I like to go with their recommendation of sticking with 7 samples per row. And then we'll go ahead and hit generate. And we can see that there are a few points on here, but let's make these just a little bit easier to see. If you click on the sample color, I'm just going to crank the red and the green and reduce the blue so they're all yellow, and they're a little bit easier to see around this black and white image. Now, from here, we're gonna zoom in just a little bit and place a few more points around, but also just shift things around. This can take a while, but I usually add a few extra points, try to keep it below 20 to 25. But for here, if you know exactly where the gradient is coming from, say you know that there was some light pollution nearby, then you can kind of put a few more points that way just to make sure that the algorithm knows like, hey, that's light pollution. But all we do is just move the points around, and you can see over here on the right that there is, it picks up on things, so you don't want it to be black like that over a star. You want it to be as white as possible. And that is pretty much all background. So we're gonna keep hitting, we're gonna go to the next one and just bounce back and forth and move these around. And because this does take a while, I'm gonna skip ahead a little bit and have all the points set. Alright, I have all of the points set, and they're set well enough for me. I don't really care about doing the grid pattern or anything like that. The only thing I really make sure of is that they are not over nebulosity and they're actually in the background. But from here, what you want to do is go down to target image correction and choose subtraction. Now, the only time you would choose division is if you have a lot of vignetting in your images. But if you don't really have a lot of vignetting and it's just light pollution, you can choose subtraction. And like I said, I don't check replace target image. We're gonna leave the background model available just so we can see what it looks like. And we're gonna go ahead and just run this and see what it looks like. Okay, and if we stretch our background, that's what it looks like. So I did have a little bit of light pollution coming from below the object at the time, so that looks about right. And then this is our image with the background extracted. Now I like that, so we're gonna go ahead and use it, but another way to do this is drag the triangle just out into the workspace and save that, and then you can kind of just minimize it. And actually, you can just close it because you don't need it anymore. And I'm gonna mute that because that's a little loud. And we'll go ahead and minimize the red because we don't need it. Okay, and what we're gonna do is go ahead and open up the green and then just drag this onto it, and that will run the background extraction using the red settings on the green. So what we're doing here is this little process saves it so we can use it on all three. Alright, that looks good. Alright, now that we have done the background extraction, the next thing to do is balance the colors. And the way to do that is you go to Process, All Processes, and then Statistics. And then from here, I look at the main autosave. What we're looking at is the mean and seeing which one's the lowest. And that one's the red. Green is obviously huge, you saw it when we first started, but we want to balance down to where red's at. And you can verify this if you want just by looking at the DBE images and make sure it all lines up. So we got 16, yeah, green's higher and blue's higher. Right, so we're gonna use the red as the reference image. So what we do is go to Process, Color Calibration, Linear Fit. And then we can just drag the red DBE in here, and that is our reference image. All we have to do is just open up the green, drag the triangle onto that. And we notice it's a little bit dimmer, but that's fine. And we're gonna do the same to blue. Alright, and that's it for that. All we have to do now is combine everything back together. So we'll go to Channel Management, Channel Combination. And then from here, just drag your DBE images onto their respective channels. And then go ahead and hit the circle. After channel combination is done, we have a balanced image, and if we stretch it, bam, look at that. All right, so this image, it looks pretty good so far, but we still need to do a little bit more with the background. So we're gonna go to Process, Color Calibration, and then Background Neutralization. And in order to do this correctly, we need to put a little preview down here, just anywhere where it's actually just sky. No stars, no nebulosity, just sky. And that little bit of a preview, that works out just fine. And then we can zoom back out and just drag and drop. And that's it. You can't really tell too much from way out here what it did, but if we come over here and just back and forth, see how it just kind of darkens things up a little bit? That's what we want. And we can go ahead and minimize that. Now I like to keep everything up in the corner just so I remember what I did, and I usually take a screenshot of it and save that in the folder with the final image just so I can look back at what it was that I did. Okay, at this point, if you're still finding it's a little bit green, this is a good time to run the SCNR tool, which you can find that under Process, All Processes, SCNR, and you can pick which color you want to get rid of. This one isn't really green, so I'm not going to run it, but if you want to, you can. The next thing we're going to do is get rid of the noise. So we're going to go to Process, All Processes. We need a couple things for this: Screen Transfer Function and Process, All Processes, Histogram Transformation. And the other thing we're actually going to need real quick is a luminance mask before we get going on this. So go ahead and click this button here. All right, and what we're gonna do is actually stretch the mask, and then we're gonna take the mask and put that on, drag it over to histogram transformation, and then drag that over to the mask itself. Now we see that it's overblown. We'll go ahead and just cancel the screen transfer function. The mask is permanently stretched, but we're gonna tweak it just a little bit. So we're gonna reset the histogram transformation, and then select the luminance mask. The reason we're doing this is because we're gonna have it protect the nebulosity and the stars, but allow the background to be messed with while we do the noise reduction. So what we want to do is open a real-time preview here, and then take this middle slider and then just take it to the right a little bit. What we're looking for here is to just make it a little bit dimmer, so only the brightest stuff is visible. Now it looks like it's super dim. That's fine. We want it that way. And we can just drag this over onto the mask. All right, and we are done with these for now. Go ahead and drag the mask on there like that and just minimize it. And we can see that the red is over everything we don't want to protect. So in order to change that, we do Control-Shift-I. And now we see that the lightest areas and the stars are protected, but we also need to hide it. We can do Control-K. And let's restretch the image just so we can see what's going on here. Okay, now we have our mask on there and we have the brightest areas protected. Now we're gonna go ahead and do the noise reduction. So we'll go to Process, All Processes, Multi-Scale Linear Transform. All right, and for noise reduction, it needs to be subtle. So smaller numbers working multiple times is a little bit better. And we're gonna do this in a couple different layers. So what we do first is I'm gonna make a preview of just some big area right here. It doesn't matter what it is. And then also open up a real-time preview of that preview. Okay, after we have our real-time preview opened, what we need to do is mess with the numbers and noise reduction. Now, we do want this to be subtle and smaller, and like I said, that book explains it very well on why smaller numbers are better. But what we're gonna do is make sure our real-time preview window is open, and then we're gonna change the target to luminance. And what this is gonna do is get rid of some of the graininess here, but we're also gonna go ahead and check noise reduction. Now, as soon as I do this, because the real-time preview is open, it's gonna automatically start making some changes. And we can see that it's a little bit fuzzier, but that's okay. And we're gonna leave the threshold for this as it is, but we're gonna change the amount to 0.3 and then just have it do 3 iterations. And this is a more subtle way of getting this done. Now what we're gonna do next is go through each layer and add more noise reduction, but with less numbers. So for this one, we do a threshold of 1 and an amount of 0.5 and 2 iterations. And then for the third layer, we'll do 0.5, 0.5 with 1 iteration. Now, if we just move the real-time preview down and zoom in, we see how grainy that looks without the noise reduction, but with the real-time preview, we can see that it's a lot more smooth and a little less grainy, but there is some color noise, but that's okay. We'll get rid of that in a second. So we can close the real-time preview and just drag that onto the main image. Now, the reason that we're doing a real-time preview on a smaller preview is so it all works a little bit faster. If we did the real-time preview on the whole image, it would actually take a while for the real-time preview to figure it out. And yes, we leave layer 4 alone. Once that's done and things are looking good and it's not looking super plasticky, then we're where we need to be. So what we'll do next is go back into this and reset it. And we're going to change the target to chrominance. And what we're looking for here is, if we zoom way in, see all the little color bits of noise in here. That's what we're going to get rid of next. And before we get started, we need to open up that real-time preview to see what's going on. So when it comes to the noise reduction for the chrominance, I leave the first 2 layers as default. And then for the second for layers 3 and 4, I do 2, 1, and 1, and 1, 1, and 1. And that seems to work out fairly okay. And this looks okay for the purposes of this tutorial. I encourage you to play around with this and spend as much time as you can trying to get it looking good without looking grainy or color blotchy or anything like that. But for this, we'll just run with it as it is. And we can go ahead and close the real-time preview and then drag and drop the triangle onto the main image. Now this will take a little while, so I'm going to skip it ahead. Alright, the noise reduction is done, so we can go ahead and minimize multi-scale linear transform and then get rid of the previews and the masks, because we don't need them now. Alright, and the next thing we do is we stretch it. Up to this point, if I just disable that, that's what it would look like if you just saved it as a TIFF or a JPEG or PNG or whatever. You wouldn't see anything. So we actually need to make it look like this at all times. So how we do that is we go back to screen transfer function and histogram transformation, and I'm going to go ahead and reset both of them. Alright, and we'll go ahead and hit the nuke icon on screen transfer function. Now, I don't like the auto stretches stretch. I think it's a little bit overzealous. So what we're going to have to do is reduce it just a little bit. So if you zoom in on the channels until you see these bars, we'll actually just move this down just a little bit and scoot that one, and just a little more subtle. And I encourage you to play around with this as well. Like I said, I don't like auto stretches stretch. It's a bit much. So, for the purposes of this, I think that's good, but I would say definitely play around with it. And then go ahead and drag that up to the histogram. So now we see our little curve here, so that means that it is there. And then we can go ahead and just drag and drop onto the image, and boom, wow, overstretched. Okay, cancel the preview, and now this is permanently stretched. If I were to save this as it is right now, that's what it would look like. And we're done with the histogram transformation and screen transfer function, so we can put these off to the side. So the next thing I like to do before doing anything else to try to preserve the stars as they are, because I'm fine with them how they are right now, is use StarNet to remove them. So that is located under Process, Object Recognition, StarNet. Now the first thing you definitely want to do is check the Create Star Mask box. We don't have to worry about the stride. It apparently doesn't affect anything. Quiv actually put out a pretty decent video about that one. But these weight files, if you've never used StarNet, you do need to add them. And the way to add them is you click on the wrench there, and then you look for the folder. So for the folder for Windows, it is under Program Files, Pixinsight Library, and for Mac, it is Applications, Pixinsight Library. So pretty similar folder structure, but you just want to hit the folder icon, go in there, select the right one for RGB or mono, and then hit OK to add those in. From here, all we're doing is dragging and dropping onto the image. And this takes a little while too, so I'm going to skip it ahead. All right, here we go. StarNet has finished, and we can go ahead and minimize it because we're not going to need it anymore. But there is our star mask. And we can minimize it for now because we don't need it at this time. And here is our starless image. And it looks pretty freaking cool. Honestly, I always like looking at these pictures without the stars. But what we're going to do now is we're going to detail it, and we're going to bring out some features like the outer structure and just tweak the colors just a little bit. So what we're going to do is create a mask for that, and we're going to go to Process, All Processes, Range Selection. And we're going to open up a real-time preview. Now what we want here, if we reset it, what we want here is to get only the bright areas of the nebula. So we're going to reduce this and bring this in just a little bit. And we see that we got mainly the bright areas of the nebula. The other thing that we want to do is make sure that it's a little bit fuzzy. That way it feathers it and smoothly transitions out into the rest of it. So I like that mask for now. What we'll do is close the real-time preview and then go ahead and hit the square. And that creates our mask. And we can take the range mask and just drag and drop it onto the image. And if we want to verify what it's protecting and what it's not, we can do Control K, and we see that we're only going to mess with those areas. So to mess with them a little bit, we're going to go to Process, All Processes, and then Local Histogram Equalization. And again, open up a real-time preview so you can see what's happening. And if we mess with the amount slider, we don't need to mess with the other two. If we mess with the amount and then watch the image and see what happens, see how it gets all really bumped up and grainy there? We don't want to go that aggressive yet. We actually want to start small and work our way up. So if you start somewhere around 0.3-ish, it subtly brings it up, and then we'll do a little bit more targeting on the brighter areas later. So I like how this looks. We'll go ahead and close that, and then just drag and drop it in. Right, and we see that those areas have brightened up a little bit. What we'll do is remove this mask, and then we're going to make a new one that's a little bit more aggressive on the bright areas. So we'll take the lower limit up just a little bit. So now we see that we are really only on the bright areas. Close that out, and then make a new mask. And I like to do this about 2 to 3 times with how aggressive I am with smaller and smaller areas of the nebula. So this mask is done. We'll go ahead and use this. And again, with the local histogram equalization, we'll do the real-time preview. And then we'll bump this up to around 0.45 or so. Yeah, and you see that some of those brighter areas are really poking through. That's what we want right there. So we'll go ahead and drag and drop. And it's real subtle, but that's what we're going for. And I'm going to do one more run like this. Really get those fine details. Okay, Yeah, so this is the last one that I like to do right here, just like very few areas. Okay, and we'll make our new mask. And one more time. I'm gonna bump this up to around 0.6. Maybe a little more. No, 0.65 is good. So it's really subtle, but that's what we're going for. All right, and drag and drop, and we're done with that. All right, now we're gonna mess with the colors. So we're gonna do one more range mask, but we're gonna have it actually select the entire nebula, but we don't want any background in it. So let's open up the real-time preview and then take that lower limit back down and try to get as much of the object in as possible. And we'll bump up that upper limit. Actually put the upper limit all the way back up. And in the lower left there, we're starting to see a little bit of the edge of the Heart Nebula, and it's okay to bring that or to leave that in, but I'm actually gonna make sure that that's not messed with as much. So 0.13 works well for this. And there's our selection. So, oops, gotta get rid of the last mask first. I'll put this one on. Okay, so now we have pretty much the entire nebula selected, and this is fine because now we're just going to mess with the colors. And the way to do that is a curve stretch. So we'll go to Process, All Processes, and where are you? Curves Transformation. Now, doing everything in a real-time preview helps out a ton because you know what you're going to get. Without having to wait for it to process, going, oh crap, undoing and doing it again. So I like doing everything in a real-time preview. So the first thing I want to do here is target the luminance, and I want to make a slight S-curve with the luminance. Real slight. Bring this edge back down. Ooh, too much. There we go. And if we back out, a little bit brighter. Okay, and then we're going to do the RGBK. We're pretty much going to mirror what just happened with the other stretch. Maybe not that aggressive. Okay. Now we'll mess with the A channel just a little bit, just gonna pull it up just a hair. Don't need to move it much. And then the C channel as well. Don't need to move it very much. And it's getting a little bit too red. Let's go back to the A channel and bring that back down. Okay, that works out for me. And you can also mess with the hue and saturation channels if you want. You can really mess with it, you know, or just be very subtle about it. There we go, and saturation. Perfect. For the purposes of this, that's fine for me. I actually quite enjoy how this looks, so we will go ahead and close that out. And we will just drag and drop onto the image. There we go. And we see we got a lot of contrast between the light and the dark areas, and that's what I want, and that's what I was aiming for with this. So we will go ahead and minimize all that stuff because we don't need it anymore. And now it's time to bring back the stars. All right, in order to bring back the stars, we first have to get rid of the mask, and then we're gonna go to Process, PixelMath, PixelMath. And I have it down in the description below, the formula you need to do this, but it's basically whatever number your image is. So mine is image 11. You just change that plus 0.8 times star mask. And what that 0.8 does is it actually reduces the stars for us. So there's a little bit of star reduction brought in when adding the stars back. And you can be as aggressive as you want with it. You can say 0.5 to make them real tiny, but just know there's going to be some halos. Or you can just say add the star mask back in to just bring the stars back as they were. I like bringing them back in a little bit reduced, so the 0.8 works out fairly well. And all you do is drag the triangle over and boom, our stars are back. And doesn't this look friggin' amazing? All right, so the last things you can do is you can put on another range selection mask or other masks and just continue stretching and sharpening there. Or you can leave it as it is and call it good. However, I'm gonna take it over into Photoshop real quick and do a few final touches there. So to do that, when you save it, you can do save as, and I'm gonna name this one just image 11, I'll leave it as it is, but save it as a TIFF if you're taking it over to Photoshop. And when you take it to Photoshop, make sure it's a 16-bit unsigned integer. And the reason for that is that you won't have to mess with the channels, change the image mode or anything bringing it into Photoshop. It'll already be good to go. And then just hit OK. Now we're gonna hop over to Photoshop. Okay, so for now, this image actually looks fairly good as is, but I do a few other tweaks to it. So the first thing is Control-Shift-Alt-N+E to make another layer on top of it. That way we leave the original alone. And we actually need to use Astronomy Tools action set for this. And for this, what I'm gonna do is just say make stars smaller. If you need Astronomy Tools action set for Photoshop, I have the link to where you can download it down in the description. And we'll just go ahead and run it. And it kind of confuses my Photoshop just a little bit. If we just take this layer and just hide it, we can see that the stars dim down just a little bit, and that's the only tweak we really wanted to do there. And the other thing that I don't like about this image right now is you can see that it's a little bit crunchy still from messing with all the details. So we're gonna make another layer and then run less crunchy, more fuzzy. This one takes a little while, so I'm gonna skip it ahead. Actually, it went faster than I thought. When I ran it last night, it took a while. So now if we zoom in and look, it's a little bit smoother, and that's exactly what we wanted. All right, from here, the other thing that I will do is make one more layer. And then I'm just gonna do a local contrast enhancement. Now, what this did is it sharpened it back up, and I don't like how aggressive that is. So I'm gonna reduce the opacity of this down to about 55%, just so we can still see everything behind it. And then from there, really, if I wanted to crop it or add my watermark or any other small tweaks, that's typically what I'll end up doing. But for this, I think it is just fine. But that's the general gist of my processing workflow. It can take much longer to get the desired results, so I highly encourage you to take your time when you're editing and make small tweaks here and there over time till you get the desired result. I also want to encourage you to take a look at that book that I mentioned and also some other YouTubers. Take a look at what they're doing and what other people do and incorporate little bits and pieces of their workflow into your own, and this should help you create an amazing image. Editing astrophotos is something that takes quite a long time to master, and it evolves over time. And I hope that this video helped you out. If you found this video helpful, please do like, comment, and maybe consider subscribing. I want to thank you for watching. Clear skies.